61% of households now in the United States say their electricity costs are too high.
Let's talk about what's going on in the industry today.
Now we have AI coming in, and that's very scary for consumers.
This is a big piece of that energy puzzle as we go forward.
If people do not know about something, they are not going to buy it.
Consumers generally only want to think about their utility. Okay, I'll pay the bill, keep the lights on, and don't make it too expensive.
50% of households are actively working to try to reduce energy consumption.
The data is becoming more valuable than the electrons. Welcome to this episode of the What and Why podcast. We've got a great session in line for you all today. We're going to be talking about the smart homes and their role in our utility and energy future. Obviously, this is a big piece of that energy puzzle as we go forward, and we're very fortunate to have someone who lives in this world joining us today. So very briefly, let me introduce our guest today, Elizabeth Parks. She's the President and Chief Marketing Officer with Parks Associates down there in Dallas, Texas. She's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, and she's been with the firm for 27 years. Interesting side note, kind of the short version of how Elizabeth and I became acquainted was 30 years ago, I had joined Penwell Publishing, many of you all may remember, by virtue of an acquisition. I was running a research group and starting up a magazine and doing some other things while I was at Penwell. And one day I was summoned into the boardroom to meet with a lady named Tricia Parks, who had started up and was very successfully running and growing this research firm that has grown into what Parks Associates is today. So I've always kept Parks Associates on my radar. They do great work. And we're very fortunate to have Elizabeth here with us to share some of her insights. And in fact, Parks Associates is now in its 40th year, and they'll be celebrating that very shortly. And their signature conference, the conference, which I believe is called the Connections Conference, is in its 30th year. So lots of milestones going on at Parks Associates. And Elizabeth, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Mike. I'm excited to talk about the energy industry, and it's great. I mean, the long history you have with our firm, and I know we've worked together on and off with a few projects over the years. So I appreciate the invitation.
I like to kind of just start with something that's pretty high level. Like, let's talk about what's going on in the industry today. Obviously, there's this convergence that I see, having been in the industry for 35 years, of obviously the energy transition, the technologies involved, the changing customer dynamics and that role of the customer, the changing workforce, and of course, the technology and the regulatory landscape. It's this convergence where, 30 years ago, the industry was kind of very steady, incremental change. I think the last 10 years or so, it's really been turned kind of on its head. A lot of that is a really good thing. I think we're doing some really interesting work in the space, but there's certainly some challenges. And when we step back and look at what I'll call that energy mix and that energy solution, what that's going to look like in the future, the other side of the meter, the smart home, is going to be and is already slowly emerging to be a big piece of that. So I wanted to talk with you initially just a little bit about that. When we talk about what this energy and utility landscape of the future looks like, particularly as we move deeper into the energy transition, what are you seeing from the Parks Associates perspective in terms of how smart homes and all of that technology, most of which I believe is on the other side of the meter where you all are focused, where does that fit into the mix? And what are maybe a few of the big things that you're seeing that we should keep an eye on just at a very high level?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when you're looking back a few decades, the world has changed a lot. And so there's all these different opportunities now that are existing and are necessary because of the way technology has progressed. So I think from our view, we have a very, very close look at the consumer market and understanding how consumers are adopting different energy devices, systems, and services in the home. And obviously that's going to be tied directly to the utility play. And what the utilities are offering to consumers, as well as their great need to be able to manage and understand the usage of energy, particularly when there is high demand. And so because of the introduction of AI technologies and data centers, which are necessary for all of the processing that is going to be, behind the scenes with AI technologies, which is an incredibly big, huge market to be talking about. There's now a great need to be able to manage energy in different ways. And so then the consumer market really comes into play because you have individual households. You also have multifamily households. So about a third of consumers in the United States, about 32 or 34%, live in some sort of multifamily, multi-dwelling unit. And so that would include apartments, condos, student housing, senior living would also be in that category. So when you look at the whole market together with single family housing and multifamily, you have this incredibly large population to try to manage and leverage the devices that are in the home to save energy, be more energy efficient. And then also the big kicker will be to help manage the coordination of energy management in the future and also provide analytics on energy usage and tracking. And so I'll pause there, but that's where the big picture is. And so that's my initial comment on that one.
Yeah, well, that's great, and that's a lot. And that actually, you saw me scribbling some notes here. That sets up a pretty interesting discussion with a couple different pieces to it. Let's talk just about the consumer for a minute. When we look at an average household, and again, to your point, multi-family dwellings or single homes, there's so many new technologies that I think consumers are being bombarded with. And there's always the early adopters and folks who love technology. There's other folks who I just want to pay my bill and be left alone, right? And that's kind of the spectrum, right? And everything in between. So can you point to a couple of things, be it devices or systems or technologies where, wow, this is getting traction and having an impact? I know that some are more successful than others. And I'd love to, let's set the utility aside for a minute for this part of the discussion and just talk about what is it that the consumers are really glomming onto and saying, this is cool, I like using it, and oh, by the way, it's going to help me with my energy bills.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that first point there from your end comment is helping people with their energy bills, and that's the value proposition. Why does somebody even want to have these devices in their home, and why are they purchasing them? So our data is showing that 61% of households now in the United States say their electricity costs are too high. So that's number one, is their perspective of cost and this value behind purchasing or entering in any of these programs the utility is providing. We also show from our research work, and that research is we are surveying 8,000 internet households in the United States every quarter. And we've had that methodology now for over a decade. And so we have this long trending view of the perception of cost as well as the adoption of these different devices in this market and then across the whole home. So we're also showing that 50% of households are actively working to try to reduce energy consumption. And about a third of those say that they want help with being able to manage and be more energy efficient. We also know that the reason why somebody is buying a smart home device, and we could talk about which ones are the cool ones in this category, saving energy is within the top 3 reasons of why they would get one of these devices to create a routine. As far as the specific devices, of course, the smart thermostat, and when we think of the ecobee thermostat as first to market, way back in around 2008, we also have the Nest thermostat that it was very cool. And those types of devices now are in about 16 to 17% of all US households. And sometimes thinking about percentages is hard because, well, how many households are we talking about? So Parks Associates is tracking around 125 million internet households in the United States. So we have a very close look at the broadband market and the number of consumers who have internet access, which is necessary for some of these connected devices. So 1% in our data, when we're talking about all households, is equal to about 1.2 million households. Right. So that 17% is maybe 20 million households who have a smart thermostat.
Okay,
and that is the highest adopted energy device out of all of the smart home devices that we are tracking.
That's not surprising. I would have guessed that, but it's good to have the data behind it. My follow-up question specifically about the smart thermostats is I can remember, I'm going to say early 2010s when, I started reading about it and, seeing things at conferences and probably seeing some of your research as well. There's buying, there's installing, and then it's how are you using it? And I remember hearing about all these cool things like it's going to have geofencing and it'll know when you're 5 miles from home and it'll turn on your air conditioner so your house is cool. And then, of course, all of the preset things where, for instance, here where I live, I'm a SMUD customer and we have time of use metering. So, you can automatically set your thermostat to go from 76 to 78 at 5 p.m. and then back at 8 p.m. and all that, all those things that are kind of cool. Now, I've also heard that not everyone uses their smart thermostat to its full use or capability, which is probably true with everything from Microsoft Word to everything that's more complicated from there going forward. So there's a growing installed base. 20 million sure sounds like critical mass. Do you all have a sense or maybe even have data behind how people are using these and what some of those results are around their usage?
Yeah, a lot of this really is in that automation that comes with being able to have the thermostat adjust on its own to save you money, right? That's going to be the primary use case, and we do track that, and consumers do tell us that they save about $45 a month on average. And so that means that some people are a lot higher than that. Of course, that's the average, and a lot lower. So that actually adds up if you think about saving, $500 a year on electricity. So that is a very positive thing. And the big part of that extends to the utility is that participation in demand response programs, where the utility can then call on that household with an alert and saying, hey, can we adjust your thermostat because we're in a high demand situation, and that would help us by 2 degrees, of change, or just be able to do that automatically. And those programs would incentivize consumers to want to do that automation, and then they are helping out the utility in that way. And those individual households then add up to, a lot of energy savings. So also extended beyond that, the consumer directly wants to understand the analytics and those savings. And so that app experience becomes a really critical way for that engagement to occur. And so if we know that consumers are actively working to reduce their energy, 36% say they want help, then it's how do you tell them, how do you give them that information on a regular basis so that they can then do things to impact their energy usage. And so we also know that 46% of smart home device owners across the board are willing to share their energy usage data.
Okay.
And so
With their utility?
that's
With their utility?
yes, with the
Okay.
utility and or other service providers in the home. And so that's really where it becomes a lot more powerful, because then you're talking about integration across, other areas of the home. And, that could be the HVAC. It could be, there's a lot that's using energy in the home where you find those connections. And that's where the power of the analytics comes in, particularly if you have a household with solar or EV, and then the storage. That's when we start talking about home energy management systems. And now we're into a whole nother category of energy efficiency and savings, that when you add it all up, you get lots of little savings, and it's a big deal for the utility.
I can see that definitely. In fact, did a little work earlier this week around virtual power plants and how integrating, or aggregating all those batteries in a service territory and all that. That's a very powerful story. I think there is a challenge with the upfront costs, and I think we need to figure that out as an industry, how to manage that better. So not everyone is geared for that upfront cost, and figure out ways to either finance it or what have you. I know a lot of that is out there in place, but that value prop is something that consumers in general need to understand better. And one of my little soapbox speeches is consumers generally only want to think about their utility. Like, okay, I'll pay the bill, keep the lights on, and don't make it too expensive. There's still a big chunk of the population. That's kind of where they are. I think as rooftop solar and EVs in particular, and then a lot of the other things like thermostats, like batteries, as those become more common, people are going to be way more interested in their utility, and they'll understand how to read their bill, which most people don't. And I think we're on that path. So a lot of potential, few challenges along the way. I do want to switch over to the utility side of the discussion, and you've made some good comments that are a natural segue there. When you start talking about the data, it reminds me of the old saying that the data is becoming more valuable than the electrons. And I think that may be overstating it a bit, but utilities are becoming more and more dependent on data, particularly how they engage with their customers. So taking a step back again and looking at that, I'll call it the traditional utility to customer relationship. It's good in that it works for what it is. But whenever historically utilities have tried to do more than that traditional role, they've usually stumbled. I think that's a fair statement, which to me says, okay, there needs to be a third party or an intermediary, and that speaks to partnerships. And I think just from some of the discussions we've had, you all see that's a big piece of how this whole ecosystem can move forward. So what does it look like where a utility has a partner with a smart thermostat company or a battery company, and how do you see that kind of evolving? And again, maybe you have some data that supports that and some real world experience as well. What do you see there in that partnership ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, stepping back just a little bit, let me share that we are tracking NPS scores for energy providers at negative 25. Okay, so that is bad. That is
Good.
like broadband and might even be worse than the broadband and cable companies, right? But the fiber has high NPS, but the old school cable, they have really negative NPS. So the utilities do not have a relationship. It's been very transactional. It's been somewhat of a, you have to buy from me. In some cases, there's only, you don't have a lot of choices in some markets. The deregulation created a lot of choice and has opened up the opportunity to build that relationship. But utilities and energy providers do not have a good existing relationship with their customers. And I don't think it's going to change without the partnership and without a strong brand that the consumer recognizes to bridge and build that relationship, right? It's just, there's a lot of utilities and energy providers who are trying to change that position and are making headway. But generally speaking, if you bring a brand partner in that's in the consumer market, which there are plenty of, you're going to strengthen the viability of what the end goal is, which is getting connected devices connected and being able to be used in the home. So a really good example is the Vivint and NRG in Texas play, where NRG has bought Vivint, which is a security company and a premium security monitoring company. And they also offer all these other devices that are controlled by the security system as the core controller and app interface for the most part. And then they are bridging, not just partnering, they got bought by one of the largest utilities in the United States. And that utility is now utilizing the Vivint as part of the installation, because one of the big problems is, we can give away all these thermostats as part of a program, but they never get connected.
Right.
And so great that you got them out to the market, but they didn't get connected. So actually that's useless.
Yeah.
So, so there's a number of steps here in installing to get the product connected and is a big problem, right? So there's that piece is important to happen. A lot of consumers won't go do that themselves with a thermostat.
Yeah, and that speaks to that acquisition. That speaks to just how much that landscape is changing. I think another thing that you hear sometimes is, in a few years, you may be paying your energy bill to Google, or, and Google's certainly involved in the energy space in a lot of different ways, some of it out of necessity with those massive data centers. Let me ask you a question, which I think could be interesting in terms of how consumers view their utility and some of these device and solution companies around the data. Do you think that, or do you all have data, or have you seen, as on average or in the aggregate, are consumers more likely to trust their utility with their data or with some of these device companies? I'm sure there's branding and value propositions that impact all of that, but I'm wondering if moving the needle calls for kind of a break from that traditional relationship and how the data is leveraged and shared and all that sort of thing. Where do you see that heading?
So the most trusted providers, out of home service providers, are security and insurance. And there should be some good obvious reasons around that, because I mean, if you're paying for security, you are paying for them to show up when there's a problem, and there's a promise of the police and protecting your home and your family. Insurance is very similar, right? I mean, you only use your insurance when you have to and something bad has gone wrong, and you trust that they're going to fix whatever in, and you're paying for that along the way. A lot of times everybody's thinks, oh, well, yay, I don't have to ever use my insurance, right? Because nothing bad's happened. So those are the top trusted providers. The tech giants and the service provider ISPs and utilities, consumers do have an understanding that there's a use of their data. And so the privacy and data concerns are there. They are one of the top reasons, beyond affordability and value, of why somebody is not going to buy these products, right? They just don't trust it. And we have younger generations that are growing up very different, in a different world of exposure with, you know how it is with these young people these days, and the phone being attached to them.
We'll
And
sound really old if we spend too much time on that.
so I mean, data privacy and security is an issue. They are absolutely going to use the data to help better the experience of the product, and there is an exchange there. And certainly there is a great deal of exchange with the utilities, because it's all about the usage. The data is showing the use and the efficiency of energy, so they need to have access to the data to be able to be effective within the programs and the offerings that they have. So there's a lot there that could be very concerning. And now we have AI coming in, and that's very scary for consumers. We've done a lot of research on AI perceptions and use, and absolutely it's being used, but it's also, could end the world, right? And
As we know it,
it's
yeah.
very scary. So.
Yeah, it is. So let me, I'm gonna maybe twist the question a little bit here. So I'm gonna say that you are either the CEO or maybe the chief customer officer of a utility, and you've got issues around load growth. So you're interested in um, either peak shaving or peak shifting, right? And you're a savvy executive, and you know there's technology out there, but you also know that utilities have historically had problems getting traction outside of those traditional core utility services. What would you do if you were in that seat and you're like, okay, yeah, there's obviously things going on our generation team and our T&D team, but there's more we could and should be doing with our customers to help solve this problem, while, by the way, enhancing service for our customers at the same time. So you're in that seat. What's a couple of things that you would want to do to move the needle on kind of managing your load growth?
Yeah, we have a theory of relevancy here at Parks Associates that tracks value, affordability, and familiarity. It's actually a theory that Trisha, that my mom developed back with AMD in 2009. And it was meant to understand the tipping point of moving in to different stages of technology adoption, like early adopter towards the mass market. And so if I was in that position where I was an executive, and I'm trying to get my customer, which I'm going to say is the consumer or a business, to add and pay more for services and devices, it would be education, right? The lack of familiarity. If people do not know about something, they are not going to buy it. They won't. So so the number one thing is education. It's not just educating the customer. Now you have to educate your team internally. They don't know about it either. They don't understand this stuff. So there is a lot of internal education that would help, obviously, spread throughout the organization. And these utilities are big for the most part. There's a lot of individuals who do different things, and understanding what are we even talking about here and what is the future. So that's important internally, but externally it's educating the customer on and we're moving into mass market with the smart home, right? 47% of households have one of these devices, and 12% of the US households have 9 or more. are superpower users. So we are moving into a different period of time where there's a different kind of understanding. And then you add in the app and the phone, everybody knows the capabilities here of these devices.
Right.
And so education, education, education.
Yeah. And I think as, our kids become adults and go out and are buying homes and starting families and all that, they grew up with technology. They assume that you're going to have that. So I think that dynamic will change and the adoption rates will continue to ramp up, maybe even accelerate. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops. We're coming near the end of our time. I had a couple questions I wanted to ask you that are a little bit off the track that we've been on so far, but this has been great. Really appreciate your insights. So, a couple questions as we wrap up here. One is share with our audience something that you love about the utility industry. We've both been around for a long time and we both probably have some thoughts on what we really like about it. So what's been your experience? What do you love about the utility industry?
Well, I love the long history of understanding the how utilities are operating and what the consumer market means to them, and really being part of that evolution over time. I mean, one of the very first jobs that my mom got, besides counting computers, right? Back in the 80s, IBM said, we're going to have a PC in every single household. That is one way she started her business. I'm going to telephone survey 1,000 households in the US to track computing. One of the second projects was working with the utility providers in the deregulated energy markets in Texas. And so she helped survey consumers, what would make you choose one utility provider over another. And so we have this really long history. I mean, working with Penwell back in the day, and some of these groups that also have grown up, like Parks Associates. And so I just love the history that we have, and the very important position that energy management holds within the whole home ecosystems that we cover here at Parks Associates.
Yeah, and boy, you reminded me of the 80s and a PC in every home. And I was thinking that did seem just like a stretch. But I don't know if you ever caught this, but a lot of the times people would talk about, well, what are you going to do with it? And I don't know if you remember this, but one of the things that always came up was recipes. It's a great place to hold recipes. I think we've come a long way since then. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So, final question. You've had a very interesting, dynamic, successful career, but obviously we all have a life outside of what our resume or our LinkedIn page reads. So tell us something about yourself that doesn't necessarily show up on a biography or a resume.
Well, I have two things I'd like to share. First, I'm happily married for almost 19 years with three beautiful children who are teenagers.
Congratulations.
Teenage world. I work with my husband for 25 years, and my mom, of course, is our owner and our chairman now. It's a very much a family business. And then secondly, I am a world record holder for rowing. So in high school, I was a rower, and I went on to college and rowed and did crew at Connecticut College in Connecticut. And when I was 16 years old, I was the world record holder for time in the 2,500 meter race.
Holy
And
cow.
so that some claim to fame there.
Wow. Okay. So where's your rowing career stand today?
I have not rode in a really long time. I've moved on to the bike because I live right by the bike trail, and it's real easy to make that happen. So I biked 6 miles today to start the day.
Okay, good. Well, you're still getting out there and getting a workout in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe when those teenagers go off to college, you'll have some time to dive back into rowing.
Yeah, it's teenager.
It's
Something.
a lot. It's a lot. I understand. Well,
Yeah.
listen, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. Like I said at the top, I think that our industry is at a really interesting point, almost an inflection point, because we've been going down a certain road again with that convergence of all those things happening for, 15 years-ish right now, where it's gotten very serious to the point where the landscape is really different now than it was 15 years ago. I think we're at a point now where there's a little bit of not a pause, but certainly a reassessment. Some of the renewable energy goals, as you get, the first 10, 20% is relatively easy. When you get to 60, 70, 80%, it gets difficult and complicated and expensive. And I think looking at that energy mix leads us back to some of the things we've talked about today. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 5 years. And I know myself and a lot of our viewers are going to make sure they keep Parks Associates on their radar, because you all are always doing some interesting work. So thank you so much. We'll hope to connect again. And thank you to our audience for joining us today, and watch for more from the Watt and Why podcast coming your way soon. Thank you.